Hello everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, where I wish to remind you that we are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I've finished a couple of books recently, ready to talk about them in this next installment of my book reviews. And the first one I want to talk about is a recent one, the one I finished the most recently. Okay, yeah, let's get that right. And it's an anthology. It's called Be Gay, Do Crime, 16 Stories of Queer Chaos. And I saw this in a bookstore, and I saw the title, and it immediately made me think of this graffiti that I saw on the side of a building down in Chinatown in Chicago while I was on my way to a concert venue. And I snapped a photo of it, which is what you see at the beginning. And, or I should say, is what you see as the teaser image, for the video. And I thought, okay, I got to get this, just because of that. I mean, not only was it saying the same thing, the graffiti, but it was the same font. So I thought that was really quite, I don't know, serendipitous. Is that the word to use? And I gotta say, this is a really, really good collection. Most of the stories are written by female authors with female characters, lesbian characters. And I have to admit that I really haven't read very much lesbian fiction or fiction in general written, gay fiction in general written by women. And I really enjoyed each of these stories, and some of them are definitely, much better than others, but they're all quite good. The favorite ones would be one of the later stories. It's called Grand Beaver Cabin, which is interesting story because it's about these two lesbians, their girlfriends. They go to this theme resort called the Grand Beaver Cabin, which is very similar to like Wolf Lodge, which is in Traverse City, Michigan. It's an outdoor, family-oriented theme destination. So you've got the hotel, and then they've got these water slides, indoor pool area. That's what this Grand Beaver Cabin is, except it's like a beaver theme. Okay. And she wins this weekend because she's an adult, sort of a failed artist, but she enters these drawing contests pretending she's 11 years old and keeps winning all these different things. And the trip, the weekend to Grand Beaver Cabin was something that she won. So that's what the premise of the story is, and there are certain interesting perspectives that are brought in by the different characters. And also the fact that her little charade is ultimately revealed to her girlfriend. And so good, it's a good read. Another one is the first two, actually. The next one is It's a Cruel World for Empaths Like Us. So you've got this person who is getting Botox and kind of works in like this office, and the typical type of office. They are a trans person And so during the transition, they're getting the Botox, and they are increasingly frustrated with their life and just the way things go on around them. So they get this perverse joy out of doing something that is illegal, and how they are kind of caught up in it, and for lack of a better explanation, maybe cannot stop, and what happens to them. It's not a serious crime. In fact, none of these are real serious crimes that are being committed, but they are, if not outright criminal actions, they are certainly actions that most people would frown upon. And then the opening story is definitely one of my favorites. It's called The Meaning of Life. And it's about these two lesbians who find a baby abandoned next to a dumpster. So they take it home and start raising it. But they want to do it off the grid, so they're doing as much as they can to not have to officially acknowledge the baby's existence. And they get into some difficult situations, difficult circumstances. But it's a really it's a great opener. It's a really well written story. I mean, most of these stories are quite short. I mean, for example, The Meaning of Life is just 18 pages. So overall, very good read. And very, easy because, like I say, they're short stories. So you can go through one or two or three, and then put the book down and come back to it later and finish it, or, you could read it in one day or two. That's something I've noticed, that with people in BookTube, a lot of people in BookTube read a tremendous amount, or at least they say they read a tremendous amount. And the number of books that they read, in one chunk or whatever, it's like blows me away. It takes, for me to keep up and hit a target of anywhere from 15 to 20 books a year. These people are saying they've read as many in a month. Where do you get the time to do that? There's something else I want to comment on about what I've noticed with BookTube that was also of interest to me. Anyway, the next book that I have here is one I finished just before, Be Gay, Do Crime, and that's this one, Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. I briefly talked about this in another video about me moving. I am now at my new location in Holland, Michigan, although I haven't completely set up house. I'm in the process of unpacking, and I get some done, a little bit each day. I mean, I unpack the very important thing, like the big furniture and my records, so I've got something to listen to. But even my music area I still need to set up. And my books, I need to get new bookshelves before I really start unpacking my books. But anyway, yes, Shuggie Bain. And as I mentioned before, this book is about alcoholism, about an alcoholic and the codependency that her children develop, whether it's positive or negative, and how her alcoholism affects everyone around her. And the story, Shuggie Bain, Shuggie is a character, her youngest son. So he's definitely a key person, a key character in the story. But it's, Agnes really, his mother, dominates most of the direction of the narrative. The book begins sort of establishing, Shuggie is alive, but he's quite young, so there's no real perspective written into the story yet. It's all about Agnes and her former relationship with Shug, who is Shuggie's father, and Agnes's relationship with her mother and father. It describes the life of working class poor during starting in the 1980s and going into the 90s, when the British economy was probably at one of its weakest moments. And so it kind of lays out Agnes's alcoholism and the contributing factors. Now, I'm not saying that I'm an expert about alcoholism, but from my understanding that with the alcoholic and with other addicts, at the core of their addiction is this harm, this hurt and resentment that, and it's not even one single one. It could be a blending of different ones that the addict holds on to and actually nourishes to a point of where the anger leads to desperation and emotional turmoil, which, whatever they become addicted to, drugs or alcohol, etc., gives them temporary respite. But it also prevents them from ever dealing with this original hurt or hurts that had occurred in their life. And the only way you can address it is complete abstinence. If you are an addict, you cannot become a recreational user and solve the core issues. You can't do it. Total abstinence is the only way that you're even going to get close to understanding what happened. I mean, recovery for addicts is very much like psychological therapy, but it's more focused on their addiction. But anyway, I want to read a couple passages. This one is from earlier in the book. So this would have been when, Shuggie was still young, so he's out of the picture. But it kind of gives you a little bit of the background on Agnes and where her hurts lay in her, or lie in her subconscious. Agnes wrapped the last of her glass ornaments in newsprint and lined up her old green brocade cases next to Shug's. So what's going on here is that she's getting ready to move with Shuggie's father, from where they currently live in Glasgow to another area, thinking that maybe in this other area they can start something new. Agnes isn't quite totally in the depths of alcoholism, but she's well on her way. We also start to learn a little about Shug, who is a aggressive and overpowering man who is used to getting things his own way. Anyway, She intermixed them, rearranged them, but no matter what she did, there was a sense that they didn't belong together anymore. And the luggage tag that hung from her case was a handwriting she barely recognized now. It was the happy, confident loops of a much younger her, running away from her first husband for a promise of a life that was worth living. Her fingers traced the forgotten name. Agnes McGowan, Belfield Street, Glasgow. When Leek was still in nappies, Agnes had run away. Leek is Shuggie's older brother. On the night she finally left, she had packed the green cases full of new clothes, showy, impractical things she had bought on the last of Brendan McGowan's tick and had kept hidden for the past long year. Before she ran away, she had scrubbed their tenement flat one last time. She knew the news would bring in the neighbors. With beady eyes, they would pour in to offer condolences to her man, hoping to gnash their gums at her uppity ways. She wouldn't dare give them the pleasure of thinking her slatternly, too. So she's on the run, essentially, from herself. We see this getting established. But she's also got this incredible sense of pride that keeps her going despite the train wreck that her life is continually turning into because of the choices that she desires. Nonetheless, it's that determination and that sense of pride that Shuggie, when he starts growing up, picks up on. And knowing that his mother is an alcoholic and that the alcoholism will likely kill her, he remains eternally devoted to her and hopeful, while at the same time he's dealing with his own issues of sexuality as he gets older and enters adolescence. He has a common experience or perspective that I think many gay boys experience when growing up. Is while they have not fully grasped who they are and their burgeoning sexuality, everyone else around them picks up on it right away. And hence they become a target of ostracization, teasing, and sometimes outright bullying. And it's also interesting because the description of Shuggie as he's being raised among his first bullies was his father. Long before other kids became bullies, his first bully was his father. Now this section I'm going to read from is later in the book. Agnes is on a bender and Shuggie's gone looking for her. And he finds his way by cashing in as much money as he can or change to get a cab to where he thinks she's going to be. How he figured this out, I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, he arrives at this house and where there's this big party going on. It's New Year's Eve, okay? And of course, Agnes had promised that she would bring in the New Year's with Shuggie, but she doesn't show up because she's out on a bender. And so, he goes looking for her. And so he arrives at this party, and this is the description I want to read from. He's in the apartment looking around and looking for his mother, but looking also at what else is going on. In the corner near the window, sitting at a small folding table, was a young boy much the same age as Shuggie. He had been watching Shuggie the entire time as he did his searching circle of the room. He was dressed in his good clothes, and his hair was still neat from when his own mother must have parted it earlier. As they looked at one another, Shuggie wondered whether he was lost or searching too. The boy raised his hand in a small wave, and Shuggie made to cross the room and speak to the stranger. Halfway there, he saw that on his little table sat a heaped plate of shortbread and some fizzy juice that still rolled with bubbles. Somebody here loved this other little boy. Shuggie turned away and went back to looking for Agnes. Back out in the hallway, he passed the tangle of legs once again. In the small, narrow kitchenette was a woman with jet black hair. His heart leapt and fell as he realized it was not his mother. Shuggie thought to ask where Agnes was, but he was so embarrassed by the little shortbread boy that he said nothing. Pride clamped his mouth shut, and the black-haired woman sailed past him like he was invisible. There were 3 bedrooms in the tenement flat. Each was empty except for the odd lost partygoer having a quiet smoke or a quiet cry. He searched them all, but none of the drunks were his. The last room was the biggest bedroom, the one for mammies and daddies. The door was closed tight, and he had to pull down on the metal handle and push hard to get the sticky door open. There were no lights on in the room, but as the glow followed him in from the hallway, he could see the large double bed was heaped high in winter coats. Shuggie stood there and put his hand on the bag of coins in his pocket. It would be just enough to get him home. Perhaps he would find her there, frantic, sobered with worry, and waiting with hot tea and toast. In the smoke and the dark, tears began to sting his eyes, and he sat on the coat-covered bed for just a minute. He was being a baby, and he knew it. He had been a big baby all night, wanting his mammy, and he wished he was more like Leek, who never seemed to need anyone. Shuggie dug the nails of his left hand into the soft part of his right arm, and he willed the poor knees to stop. Something stirred under the coats. Shuggie stood up in fright. Out from some old jackets came a small white hand. It hovered for a moment before it pulled a coat away from its face, and there, with a wet face and spoilt mascara, was his mother. Agnes's hair was flat and matted on the right side. In the dim light, the boy could see by the smallness in her eyes that she was no longer drunk. As she looked at him, her lip trembled as if she would cry. This scared him into stopping his own sobbing, and he tried to stand up straight like a big boy. One by one, he pulled the winter coats to the floor and uncovered her. Slowly she emerged, half naked and crumpled from the heap. In the half dark she held his eyes and didn't say a word. Slowly he kept pulling the layers from the bed. From beneath the heavy coats emerged her white legs and small feet. Shuggie stopped and looked at her there, and in the tangle in the hallway light, he saw that her black, pretty polys had been ripped from toe to waist. This book is a depressing and difficult read, yet it is told with such loving care for the characters. The author really is portraying these people who are living desperate and awful lives, and there's a lot of them in this book. but it's done with such a realism and care that I persisted to read it because I just found it done so well. And while there's no easy resolution to this tale, it is satisfying nonetheless. And this was, I believe, Douglas Stewart's first novel, and he has a second one out. I think it's called Young Mungo, which I've already bought, and I will be reading that soon. If I were to use the rating system in Goodreads, I believe I gave 5 stars to Shuggie Bain and Be Gay, Do Crime. I think I gave that 4 stars. And then the one I read just before Shuggie Bain is this one here, Red Leaf Bang Tree. I bought this in Vietnam. I had visited Vietnam in March. It was the second time I went there. The previous year, also in March, I went to Vietnam. And during my trip this past spring, one of the places that I went to was Hanoi, and the prison there, Hoa Lo Prison. Now, for Americans, Hoa Lo Prison is the prison where American fighter pilots, mostly fighter pilots who survived after being, shot down, were captured and then imprisoned there. Perhaps the most famous being John McCain, who became senator. So it also became known as the Hanoi Hilton. However, Hoa Lo Prison goes all the way back to the late 19th century. And it was built by the French during their colonial days in Vietnam. And for for half century afterward and more, going into the late 1950s and 1960s, mostly up to about the mid-1950s, it was used by the French as a prison to hold Vietnamese anti-colonial patriots who had either actively done something against the French regime or were suspected of being collaborators with those who took active measures against the regime. And this story is based upon, I went there and I toured the prison, and a lot of history. And one of the things that was mentioned in there is that there was this famous escape from the prison that was done on a Christmas Eve. Something like 14 inmates managed to escape, and the way they did it was through the sewer. And, I immediately thought, okay, Stephen King, and the short story from the series, the novellas, one of the novellas within the compilation known as Different Seasons. And the one in particular, Rita Hayworth, is the name of the novella, which was turned into the film Shawshank Redemption. And of course, what was the method of escape from prison there? And so I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder if Stephen King knows about this famous Christmas Eve escape that happened in 1953 or 54. Did he just come up with that concept on his own? Or is it, did he read about this or know about this and use that for the story in Rita Hayworth? Anyway, this is a fictionalized account in that it covers how each of the escapees, one, from the start, what was it like in the prison, how they went about digging the tunnel and doing their reconnaissance excursions without the guards knowing, and then after the escape, what happened to each of the men who had escaped. And it's told from the perspective of this one fellow who was abandoned. Bick is his name. He was abandoned as a child because his parents were trying to flee Hanoi, and they were caught on the road by bandits, and his parents were killed. Either the bandits killed them, murdered them, and I'd have to go back and check again, how Bick survived, and that the details, I actually don't quite recall those details. Part of the reason being, this is an English translation. I bought it at the prison at the end of the tour from the gift shop. And they had this English translation, and I only give this 2 stars in book reads because it's a terrible, terrible translation. It is really difficult to read. The translation is it's just bad. It's really, really bad. So it was a bit of a chore to read this. But I persisted because I really wanted to know, and I became very interested in the character Bick and his description of Vietnam, in the years afterward, and also in the years after reunification, because it was an interesting perspective to read how, it doesn't matter where you are, what type of government you have, there are corrupt politicians, often at the local level. And when people rise up to resist, the corrupt politicians, their first response is to try and quash whatever uprising is happening by portraying the rebellion, the people in the rebellion, as being disloyal, and liars and fabricators. It's just kind of a universal thing, whether you live in a quote-unquote democracy or if you live in a one-party system, socialist system like Vietnam. That corruption is there everywhere. And a lot of it is at local level, all right? The petty tyrants are worse sometimes than the tyrants that rise up in power. You've still got all these petty tyrants at the local level. Yeah. So in that respect, I found this story really, really interesting because of that perspective and kind of understanding the different structure, how things were going on, and that people were, concerned about working conditions and wages, and it doesn't matter where you are. Capitalism is capitalism. People who run industry, they can talk all they want about what they do for workers, but for the most part, it ain't shit. And even in a socialist country, like I say, like Vietnam, all you got to do is pay the right petty tyrant, and you'll get away. You'll get away with what you want, in some respects, Vietnam and Chicago have a lot in common when it comes to local government corruption. Anyway, so I persisted and finished this book. I don't, I seriously doubt you would be able to find a copy of this outside of that the prison museum store. I mean, there is in Goodreads, you can find an entry for the book written in Vietnamese, which might be more enjoyable if I could read Vietnamese, because, at least it's being told by someone whose native tongue is Vietnamese, and so their expression is going to be a lot better than this translation. Like I say, the translation is awful, but it's reasonable enough that, if you persist like I did, you would get, you would be able to get more out of it. So, yeah, like I say, you probably are not going to find an English translation of this anywhere. I couldn't even find it when I went into bookfinder.com and tried to enter this in. No, nothing shows up. So, however, if that's something you're really interested in and learning about more, I tell you what, if you leave a comment with your name and an email address that I can contact you, don't leave your mailing address. We can exchange email that way, so I can get that information. I'll send you a copy as long as you reside within the continental United States. I don't want to be paying the shipping for outside of the continental U.S. But if you live within the continental U.S., contiguous states, excluding Hawaii and Alaska, I'll just, let me know. First person who responds with that interest, and we'll make arrangements that I can ship it to you. So there are my books that I have read, and there is something on my to-read list that, if I can find it, it's packed in all my stuff, and I'm not exactly sure where it is, and I want to get started reading as quickly as I can. So I hope to find it soon. But the book is called No Road Leading Back. And it's a history book, nonfiction, on how a group of Jews fled Lithuania after they were forced to dig up a mass grave where 70,000 Jews were buried after they were shot by the Nazis. And so they were in this mass grave, and so this group of Jews who were imprisoned in a prison camp in Lithuania, they were charged with digging up this mass grave, bringing all the bodies to the prison camp, and then the bodies would be sent to the crematorium to be burned. This was an effort by the Nazis to hide the fact that they did this. And this history follows, I don't know if it's one or more of the prison camp inmates who were charged with digging up these corpses to bring them in to be cremated, but follows them after they escape from that prison camp, and as a result, exposing the fact of this atrocity that had occurred during World War II. So I'm looking forward to reading that, and I hope that I will find that book soon. If not, there's a couple other short books that I've recently picked up that I can go through, start reading them until I get my other books unpacked and can set things up. So yeah, that's a little catch up there, 40 minutes in, but I do want to, there was another observation I wanted to make regarding BookTube. And that is, there's some similarities with BookTube and also with the vinyl community, and that there are, especially when it comes to younger collectors, so younger record collectors and younger readers, I see a similar pattern of accumulation for accumulation's sake. Whether it's in the vinyl community, buying records like crazy because you're really into records now and you want to increase your collection. In BookTube, the same thing, goes on, particularly with younger booktubers, that, getting all these books to create their library, but, not even close to having read anything, in that library. I can relate, not so much in the book end. I did, the bulk of my library I inherited from my mother, but I also was at a point where I would be buying books all the time, but I would be getting through. There's still quite a few books in my collection that I haven't read yet, and some of them are old enough that, and they're nonfiction books. I'm kind of wondering why bother to read this now that a decade or so later, there's like new information about this subject, But anyway, that's something. So it kind of relates to the fact that, how do you find time to read? So there are some booktubers that I've watched, and I enjoy what they do a lot, but I also see them, at least with records, for a while I would be spending a couple $100 a week buying new records. But the thing with a record is, I can listen to a record in one sitting, on average, it's going to be between 30 and 40 minutes record. Whereas, if it's a double record, then we're looking at maybe 60 to 80 minutes or somewhere around there for a double record. So it's an experience that, you can go through a lot of records. And my record collection is almost 2,000 albums, so I can listen to a lot of them over and over and over again. My library, though, while I am in the process of picking out certain books to reread, I haven't read them for, in some cases, decades. I want to read them again just to see how my perspective of the book may have changed since the first time I read it, which in a couple instances had changed significantly in both directions, both into either better appreciation or looking back at it as why did I think this was so great, when I was 18, and now think it's kind of meh. But anyway, yeah, it's a different thing. So, a lot of binge buying in books that I see, and with books, that's one of those things. You can't go through a book like you can go through a record album. I can listen to a dozen record albums all in one day, and I can go back and listen to them over and over again. But to be a speed reader, I suppose if you're a speed reader, that's one thing, and you're able to comprehend everything that you read. But man, I just go, how do you have the time? When will you have the time for all the books that you have already acquired? And how will you sustain your love for books and well-written stories when, by your own design, you may have turned your passion into a burden? That's my observation, and I suppose a word of caution to some of you younger booktubers who are just going on crazy buying binges. But, you know, who am I to judge? Because I did the same with records, and I was doing that for a while with books, buying lots and lots of books, where the number of books that I was acquiring was far outpacing my ability to read them. You know, as I said, I still have new books that I bought a decade or more ago that I have not yet read because there's always something else coming along that I want to read first. Anyway, just it's going to be an interesting journey, but hey, I'm liking it. So, hey, leave a comment and your thoughts in the Down Under, please. I enjoy that. Appreciate the comments. Hit the like button, which, you know, if you haven't subscribed, you can subscribe. But even if you are already subscribed, hitting the thumbs up button, the like button, really helps out with the video's distribution by YouTube. And in fact, you should do that with any booktuber or any content creator in YouTube. If you're seeing something that you really enjoy, you know, give them a like, hit that like button, because it helps their content get distributed to a larger audience. So yeah, leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I go with the handle NewsDude76. That's NEWZDUDE76. I have a Facebook page called Calvin Wazoo, where it's focused strictly on music and music-related content and record collecting. So there are my videos about record collecting that I post there, as well as other videos and other content related to music and news in the music world. And I hope you enjoyed that. I hope to be hearing from you. And remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.